Hello everyone, this is Chromý and together we will continue the course Interdisciplinary Approaches to Language and its Use too. In this presentation we will resume our discussion of variationist sociolinguistics and we will focus on the data collection procedures used in the study of language variation. In the study of language variation, researchers employ three basic data collection techniques, namely questionnaires, interviews, and observations. Each of these techniques can be modified to satisfy particular research needs. In this presentation, we will introduce the techniques rather briefly, but there are many textbooks where you can find tips how to design the techniques so that they would fit your research aims best. Probably everyone in the contemporary Western world has some experience with questionnaires, especially with online ones. But the questionnaires we encounter are typically specific in the sense that they present an indirect research technique. This means that these questionnaires ask people about their attitudes, beliefs, experiences, and so on. This is of course problematic because people can be misled by various things in their answers. For example, it is well documented that people are not really good in reflecting their own behavior. In case we use a questionnaire as an indirect technique, our results can be somehow biased. In the research of language variation, we may use a questionnaire as an indirect technique for studying language attitudes or beliefs about language use. Importantly, a questionnaire in linguistic research may be also used as a direct technique, and it may serve for elicitation of language production. For example, we may let people fill in certain forms into certain sentences, or we may let them describe certain pictures, and so on. Naturally, this is not an ideal way how to examine phonological variation, but it is a very useful technique for the purposes of lexical variation study, and so on. This is a picture used in the data collection in the Czech language atlas. Its purpose was to elicit the names of different parts of a rake. This is quite an effective way how to get the words which people use. In fact, it could be hard or at least time-consuming to get the names of these parts using other methods. Altogether, we may say that questionnaires have certain advantages for the language variation research. They enable us a quick data collection, and it may be possible to use them so that they would target specific linguistic items we are interested in. On the other hand, they also have certain disadvantages. If we use them as an indirect technique, our results may be somehow biased. Questionnaires typically underestimate the use of negatively perceived or non-standard variants. Moreover, questionnaires cannot be too long because the respondents' willingness to participate decreases in time. In other words, questionnaires typically need to focus only on certain selected issues. The most commonly used data collection technique in variationist sociolinguistics is the sociolinguistic interview. Typically, it is used to elicit the vernacular, which is the casual speech of an individual. This elicitation can be very tricky because people may tend to use a more formal style while they are being recorded. In the literature, we may find various advices how to elicit the vernacular in particular situations. Another area of use of interviews is style shifting, which means how the speakers change the way they speak based on the situation, the topic, or the attention to their own speech. This is closely related to the issue of communication accommodation, which is the process when people change the way how they speak based on the way how their communication partner actually speaks. Last but not least, interviews may be used as an indirect technique too. We can ask the speakers about their attitudes towards certain linguistic items, about their beliefs about language use, and about their linguistic experiences, and so on. The main advantage of a sociolinguistic interview is the fact that it enables us to record real production and ideally the spontaneous speech or the vernacular. Another useful thing is that the researcher has a direct contact with the speaker and can therefore explain or specify questions which may be otherwise somehow misleading for the speaker. And the researcher may react to the speaker's behavior, and for example, she may stick more to the topics which the speaker likes to talk about and omit the topics which seem not to be of interest to the speaker. On the other hand, it takes much more time to do a research based on the interviews than based on the questionnaires. We need to record the interview, transcribe it using specific transcription rules, excerpt the data from the transcripts, and only after that we may start the analysis. Moreover, interviews are not suitable for certain research goals. First and foremost, they are not optimal for examining linguistic items which do not occur frequently. This is the reason why sociolinguistic interviews are the main technique used for gathering data, while focusing on phonological variation and not on lexical variation, for example. Certain linguistic units may be also quite unlikely to occur during interviews for pragmatic reasons, because they are situationally improper. For example, it is not very likely that a speaker who does not know you well would use imperative forms or swear words to a higher degree in the interview. Every data collection technique has certain disadvantages. As we said, interviews are the most commonly used technique in variationist sociolinguistics, and it thus makes sense to briefly mention its problems. First and foremost, the results of virtually every variationist research using interviews face the so-called observer's paradox. This is another concept coined by William Lebov, and it lies in the fact that we are trying to get the data on how the speakers speak when they are not observed or recorded, but in doing so we are observing and recording them. Thus, it may be so that the results we get are not fully in accordance with the way how would speakers speak if they would not be recorded. Another crucial problem is that it is indeed very hard to explain the results of the research based on interviews. For example, we may find that women in a certain community use much less stigmatized variants of a certain variable than men. The problem is that the interview as a technique does not give us any clue how to interpret this difference. The last serious problem of sociolinguistic interviews lies in the fact that the absence of certain variants of a variable in the speech of a certain speaker does not equal the virtual non-existence of this variant in the speaker's idiolect. This is especially problematic in the case we have only a limited amount of data from the given speaker. The last technique we will discuss in this presentation is observation. In the research on language variation, it is used to a lesser extent, presumably because it is both time-consuming and practically complicated. Nevertheless, studies which employed this technique yielded important findings about the way how language variation works. Observation is a useful technique because it tries to encompass the social context of language use and speakers are observed in their natural environment. Research using observation is typically qualitative, and it is often combined with other techniques such as with interviews or even questionnaires. Importantly, observation is a very flexible technique and it can be well adjusted for any situation. The general advantage of observation is that the researchers get very detailed information about linguistic and social behavior of observed individuals. This enables them a better possibility to explain what is going on. The obvious disadvantage of this technique is that it is extremely demanding, especially considering researchers' time. Another disadvantage is the limited possibility of quantifying the data. Before we will conclude this presentation, I have two reading tips for you. The first is the third chapter of the book Sociolinguistics, Method and Interpretation by Leslie Milroy and Matthew Gordon, and the second is the second chapter from Sally Tallemonte's textbook Analyzing Sociolinguistic Variation. Both these chapters describe the data collection procedures in much more detail than we hear, and they would be especially useful to you if you plan to do your own research in language variation. If you enjoyed the presentations, we would be glad if you would like them on YouTube. That is all from me now. See you next time.